You know, the US, as I've mentioned, of course, has been at the forefront of work to rehome racehorses for several decades now. We learned at the Aftercare conference in Kentucky about thoroughbreds having been the go-to horse in the US for many, many years till warm bloods came along in the 1980s. And that is now turning around. A lot of organisations are using thoroughbreds in far greater numbers. So our next speaker, Erin Crady, is Executive Director of Thoroughbred Charities of America, or TCA, a not-for-profit organisation that provides financial grants to approved charities involved in the rehoming and retraining of thoroughbreds. In the past 28 years, over $22 million has been handed out. So to hear more about this great work, and this is a case study of American aftercare, and also, of course, after some horrible natural disasters in recent times, a look to natural disaster management. Please welcome Erin Crady.
Okay, we're going to start off today with a brief video about TCA to give you a little bit of an intro there. So please roll the video.
Thoroughbred Charities of America raises and distributes funding to approved nonprofits that help thoroughbreds and the people who care for them. Since its inception in 1990, TCA has granted more than $22 million to hundreds of organizations. Governed by a board of industry professionals, TCA believes strongly in good stewardship of donations.
Each year, our grants committee thoroughly reviews every application submitted to us and selects recipients that successfully meet our criteria.
TCA's annual grants are awarded to organizations that support thoroughbreds, backstretch employees, and farm workers. The organization supports indirect and direct aftercare initiatives because its board and founders believe in the importance of organizations that create a market for thoroughbreds and those that are rehabbing, retraining, and rehoming. An incredibly versatile breed, thoroughbreds excel in many different disciplines after their days on the racetrack are over. Some former runners have found a second career in equine-assisted therapy services. TCA proudly supports many organizations that utilize thoroughbreds to assist people with mental health and developmental needs. In addition to helping thoroughbreds, TCA is committed to assisting programs that offer health and social services to backstretch and farm employees.
Our industry's workforce is an integral part of what we do, and we must support them. TCA's grants assist many organizations that provide much-needed services.
In 2016, the Horses First Fund was created by Ellen J. Foxwoods and TCA to provide thoroughbreds and their caretakers with emergency aid in the event of natural disasters or other catastrophes.
Let's make this an emergency fund where we don't have to wait for something terrible and catastrophic to happen. Let's just have the money there, be proactive.
TCA's grants are only possible because of the support of generous donors.
TCA donors tell me all the time that they appreciate the peace of mind that they have when they donate to TCA. They can make one donation and they know that we'll use it responsibly.
TCA is one, helping many. Please support TCA today at tca.org.
Okay, I'm going to first talk about TCA in a bit more detail. Then share the origin of the Horses First Fund, which is the fund that allows us to respond to natural disasters, and then talk about our experience in Puerto Rico with Hurricane Maria. And kind of finally, I'll share some of what we learned from that experience. So founded in 1990, TCA, we are a charitable organization governed by a board of 17 industry professionals. Our mission is to provide a better life for thoroughbreds, both during and after their racing careers, by supporting qualified repurposing and retirement organizations, but also by helping the people who care for them. We work to fulfill this mission by raising and distributing money to approved charities across the United States. 100% of our funding is from charitable donations, and as such, we believe very strongly in being excellent stewards of the funding that is entrusted to us. All of the charities that we support with a grant are independent of TCA and of each other. They are all their own nonprofit entities, so each year we conduct an in-depth evaluation of charities' operations by employing a very stringent grant application and review process. As the video mentioned, an important distinction about TCA is that we are an organization that assists thoroughbreds, but we also help their caretakers. The caretakers, of course, being the people working on the backsides of racetracks and farms across the United States. In 2017, about 65% of our grants were awarded to Thoroughbred Aftercare organizations, while 35% of our grants went to charities providing health and human service functions to backstretch and farm workers. Those annual fundraising and granting activities I've described here are really the core functions of Thoroughbred Charities of America. However, in 2016, we branched down a new path that was really the start of something that we could have never imagined would be quite so impactful. So in 2016, in Mercer County, Kentucky, 43 horses were abandoned by their caretakers, most of them thoroughbreds. When this story came out, I sent an email to my TCA board of directors and suggested that perhaps we purchase a load of hay and have it delivered to the farm where the horses were being kept. Since this was July, our annual grants had already been distributed for the year, so we tapped into a very small discretionary fund that we had. Once the hay was delivered, I let my board know the delivery was complete. One of our newest board members, who you saw there on the video, a woman named Jamie Roth, who's the co-owner of racing stable L&J Foxwoods, really wanted to do more to help those 43 horses. She said to me, I talked it over with my family, and we want to start a fund with TCA to help thoroughbreds that are in need of emergency aid. We asked Jamie and her family to name the fund, and they selected the Horses First Fund. And I mention this here today because the origin of the Horses First Fund is important, as it has given TCA the ability to respond effectively to natural disaster. On September 7th, 2017, Hurricane Irma ravaged the Caribbean and inflicted major damage on the island of St. Thomas and St. Croix. Shortly after Irma hit, I received a call from a woman named Shelley Blodgett, the co-founder of an organization called Caribbean Thoroughbred Aftercare. They are a newer organization based in Puerto Rico, but they also work to retire thoroughbreds from the racetracks in St. Thomas and St. Croix. Shelley said that with the damage from Hurricane Irma, the island nations were really struggling to find hay, so she requested a grant from Thoroughbred Charities of America's Horses First Fund. They wanted to send hay to the islands of St. Thomas and St. Croix. In the time since the abandonment case in Kentucky, we had formed a Horses First Fund committee. So I reached out to our committee and asked if they wanted to approve this grant to CTA. The committee agreed, and CTA was able to book space on a container ship of nearly 500 bales of hay that arrived in St. Thomas later that week. Luckily, CTA's other co-founder, a woman named Kelly Stobie, who lives in Puerto Rico, had significant connections in the maritime shipping industry throughout the Caribbean. But little did we know that that was really just the start of our relationship with CTA. Because on September 20th, 2017, Hurricane Maria made landfall as a Category 5 hurricane on the island of Puerto Rico. The storm would later be characterized as the worst natural disaster to ever hit the island. Running water, electricity, most communications on the island were down. Even before the hurricane hit, Puerto Rico's infrastructure was not comparable to the infrastructure on the U.S. mainland, so Hurricane Maria really dealt the island a tough blow. The island, of course, was thrust into a serious humanitarian crisis. Many residents did not have access to food or water. There is also a significant racing and breeding industry in Puerto Rico with several breeding farms and one main racetrack. Camarero Racetrack is about 30 minutes outside of San Juan. Reports varied, but it's estimated that at the time the hurricane struck, about 1,000 thoroughbreds were at the racetrack. On September 21st, I received an email from Shelley at Caribbean Thoroughbred Aftercare, and with her permission, I'm going to read you some of it. I wanted to touch base with TCA and share that Camarero Racetrack was hit very hard. Here are some photos I found on the Puerto Rican Jockey School's Facebook page, which is located at the track. They have concrete barns but zinc roofs, which aren't hurricane-proof. I have not been able to speak with Kelly. I've read reports that the municipalities where the track and Kelly are hit were among the hardest hit. Here's some of those photos she sent. You can see there the barns are just decimated, roofs torn off. Horses still standing in some stalls without a roof. Shelley sent a similar email to many industry organizations and really worked to sound the alarm to rally assistance for these horses, these thoroughbreds in Puerto Rico. It might be kind of helpful for me to step back for a second and share a bit about how the United States responds to disasters. We have a federal government organization called FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and FEMA responds to natural disasters at the request of each state's governor. So when FEMA goes into a disaster area, they completely take over the location's transportation, communications, everything becomes dictated by FEMA. Depending on how you look at this, it could be good or not so good. When the FEMA response was activated by Puerto Rico, many higher-level, broader-based animal welfare organizations began to converse about the response to the hurricane. Some of these organizations included the Humane Society of the United States, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, American Veterinary Medical Association. They all worked directly with FEMA to assess the welfare situation in Puerto Rico. Concurrently, many thoroughbred industry, equine industry groups began meeting and worked to assess the situation specifically at the racetrack. This core group became the working group focused on getting assistance to thoroughbreds at the track. It included the American Association of Equine Practitioners, Jockey Club, Brookledge's Horse America, TCA, CTA, and an organization called Ranch Aid, which I'll explain further in a moment. I can't emphasize enough that this was really a team effort. All of what I'm sharing here today was only possible because of this group of people. I'm, of course, a TCA representative, but this collective group was only focused on one goal, and that was to help the horses. So whenever I refer to we today, it's this group. In the days immediately after the storm, we learned from Shelley that the track was able to restore water for the horses, but most of the owners, the grooms, the trainers, they were unable to get to the track to care for their horses. Kelly and a few of the owners and grooms that were able to get to the track were able to visit all of the 36 barns at Camarero. Reports of the situation were pretty dire, though. No feed was available because production and transportation of hay on the island had been halted. With all of these reports, our group knew one thing, and that was that we had to get feed and supplies to the thoroughbreds at Camarero. In all of Shelley's outreach, she learned that FEMA had appointed an organization called Ranch Aid to handle all animal agriculture-related efforts in Puerto Rico. This contact would later prove invaluable to us because if we had any hopes of getting supplies into Puerto Rico, we would need Ranch Aid to work directly with FEMA to grant us the clearances we needed at the FEMA-controlled airport in San Juan. Our team reached deep within their networks, and we soon had tons and tons of donations of feed and veterinary supplies to send to Puerto Rico. Now we just had to get it there. The most obvious means would be to fly cargo into San Juan. However, since the most significant humanitarian crisis ever was unfolding in Puerto Rico, FEMA had commandeered most cargo planes in the U.S., and if there were any available planes, they were hundreds of thousands of dollars. The entire island, including the airport, was under FEMA jurisdiction, so most flights in were loaded with aid for people. So we looked into sending supplies by sea. We could load supplies in a shipping container in Jacksonville, Florida, but we soon learned that with the backlog of shipping containers at the port in San Juan, that wouldn't work. The supplies wouldn't get there with the timeliness we needed. We asked equine air transportation providers, and many of their planes just were unavailable. We almost had a plane from a large equine air shipper at one point, but then it had a mechanical issue and was out of commission for 2 weeks. We asked private aviation companies. We asked thoroughbred owners that owned their own jets, but we were striking out left and right. We had 22 tons of alfalfa cubes and $10,000 in veterinary supplies ready to go. We just had to get it there to Puerto Rico. Then on September 27th, Shelley from CTA sent another email to our team, and again, with her permission, I'm going to read you part of it. There are many horses in the vet clinic with colic. The vets are very overwhelmed with patients in the clinic and little supplies. Many meds have run out or are dangerously low. There is still no hay. Hay production in Puerto Rico isn't up, and feed isn't available from the plants or the stores. Many horses are standing in muck, and 90% of the barns don't have roofs. Things are bleak. We need immediate forage and hay and manpower to care for the horses. Then on September 28th, I received the email that we had all been hoping for. One of TCA's board members knew a shareholder in a company called Swift Air, and he could get us a plane. We staged the feed and vet supplies at the Miami, Florida airport the next day. There you see the feed and supplies in the warehouse. We finally had our plane, but we knew getting landing permissions for equine supplies at a FEMA-controlled airport was not going to be easy. We were given the green light for departure on September 30th. We were elated, that the flight was finally going to happen. Kelly prepped a crew of truck drivers in San Juan that were going to unload and load the supplies, but then we learned that there was an issue with the cargo in Miami, and our departure date was moved back a day. We were disappointed, but we were told we were now going to be going on October 1st, so we relayed that information to Kelly in Puerto Rico. She would repeat the same process the next day of prepping a crew to load and unload. Then, just before our scheduled loading time, we learned that FEMA pulled our slot. 3 words I will never forget, because there was no ground handling crew available to offload the cargo from the plane to the freight forwarder in San Juan. We were given a new departure date. At this time, none of us were feeling too optimistic about the plane until it was actually airborne. But then, later that day, I was texted some of the most wonderful photos I've ever seen. The cargo was on the plane. This was a really good sign. On Monday, October 2nd, almost 2 weeks after Hurricane Maria, at 4:30 a.m., Swift Air Flight 401 departed from Miami, Florida, and landed in San Juan, Puerto Rico. I remember furiously hitting the refresh button on my flight tracker on my computer so I could know exactly when the wheels were up on that airplane. The plane landed at 7:30 in the morning. Kelly and her team were there at the freight forwarder to transfer the cargo. On that flight were 20 tons of alfalfa cubes, $10,000 in veterinary supplies, and 2 satellite telephones. This was the first of 3 planes that our team was able to send to San Juan with feed and supplies. Eventually, the feed mills came back online and hay production returned to Puerto Rico, so supplies became available there on the island. None of us had ever experienced a situation like this, and the thing about natural disaster management is there is not a playbook or instructions. I wish there were. There's really no way to know what to plan for when it comes to natural disasters because of the unpredictability of them. However, we did learn quite a bit from this experience in Puerto Rico, and I'll share with you some of the takeaways that I learned. Firstly, having an emergency fund to assist thoroughbreds in need is something that we are very fortunate to have because it allowed us to take an active role in this rescue. With the Horses First Fund, we've been able to bring assistance to thousands of thoroughbreds. The funds are there available in the Horses First Fund. There's no need to take the time to fundraise when disaster strikes. Something else that we took advantage of was technology. There are so many people contributing to this effort, and we learned to communicate effectively by copying everyone and anyone involved on any pertinent emails. We also had numerous group text messages going back all the time, back and forth all the time. Technology makes it really helpful to update a large group of people at once for maximum efficiency. Another thing I took away from this experience was that the group of people that came together for Puerto Rico was pretty special. There were many highs and lows. Everyone seemed to take it in stride. If one person got down or frustrated, there was always something there, someone else there with encouragement. So good partners are crucial. Another takeaway from our experience was that most people are willing to help in some capacity if they are asked. You never know where you're going to find the help you need or the plane you need if you don't ask. It's also important when dealing with natural disasters to have accessible decision makers at all times. Things change and develop so quickly. You need a team that can respond immediately. The third plane we actually secured was co-sponsored by several organizations, and we had about 30 minutes to decide whether or not we were going to take this plane, if we were going to book the flight, or they were going to give it to someone else. So it's definitely important to have people on your team that are accessible, can make significant decisions, and authorize spending. And finally, I think the biggest thing I learned in Puerto Rico was to have patience. There were so many setbacks and false starts, but we had to keep trying to help the horses. There were times when I was extremely frustrated, and in disaster situations, it's important to remember that everyone is stretched thin, everyone is working long hours. People may be suffering great losses of property, possessions, or even loved ones, particularly when a humanitarian crisis is involved. These are some of the supplies being offloaded there in Puerto Rico. Some happy grooms and trainers receiving donations of alfalfa cubes. And there we have some happy horses, happy thoroughbred. So that's all. Thank you to IFAR, the Jockey Club, Godolphin, everyone for letting me share this experience. It was something we will never forget. Hopefully there will never be another one, but we appreciate it. Thank you.